The problematic prince. The investigation has been closed due to the fact that Miss Hardy is not missing, the officer said. Pavel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Erna had not returned home and had not been seen in days. That can't be. No one has seen Miss Hardy in days, Pavel desperately explained. Young man, look here. The officer pulled out the missing persons report and showed it to Pavel. See, the girl is not missing and it was a false report due to family error. It can't be, Pavel stammered. I'm sorry, it happens all the time. 9 in 10 cases involving missing aristocracy kids are like that. It's what happens when you force people into marriage. The officer gave a smirk and tossed a newspaper in front of Pavel before heading off to deal with another irate visitor. The daughter of Viscount Walter Hardy, who had been reported missing, was found to be living with the Grand Duke. Pavel couldn't believe it. He reread it several times. The article went into details about Miss Hardy and her long-standing involvement with the Grand Duke, even going so far as to claim the pair was thought to have eloped. Pavel was horrified and snatched up the newspaper and read it again. The article was so vulgar, he couldn't believe the person who wrote it considered themselves a journalist. Oh my God, the old lady has collapsed. Someone shouted. Pavel looked up and saw the fallen Baroness Baden laid out on the floor, Mrs. Grieve close at hand. She was a mess and staring down at the unconscious Baroness. There was a newspaper gripped in her hand. Dejected, Erna flopped on the bottom step and sulked. She looked up and down the road, trying to think of what to do. She waited for Pavel. She lowered her head as people passed her by, memories of last night suddenly springing to mind. She didn't want people to recognize her and generate yet more rumors and scandal. The long waiting continued long through the day and right up to sunset. She had a premonition that Pavel was not going to return if he did not return by sunset. What was she going to do now? There was no way she could stay in the city any longer. Tiredness was starting to creep into the corners of her mind and turn her head fuzzy and distant. Resting her head on her crossed arms, supported by her knees, she was surprised by a man's voice. At first, she thought it was some lucid dreaming. Erna? She looked up as the man's voice called out to her. The voice was unmistakable. Pavel, you're still here? She called back. There was no chance she could fight off the smile that spread across her face, even as she thought on how he had broken his promise the other night. Pavel ran up to her. His face was grim. What's wrong, Pavel? I need to take you to the hospital, Pavel said flatly. Then he noticed the bruises and half-healed cuts on Erna's face. What happened to your face? Was that your father? That bastard. Did that bastard lay hands on you? Not now. What's going on? What happened? Erna said. There was so much to talk about, so many questions she wanted to ask, but the most important one for now was why did she need to go to the hospital? It's your grandmother, Erna. Come, we have to go right away, Pavel said and took her hand as if to lead her the whole way. What? Pavel, wait. What's happened to my grandmother and why is she in the city? Erna became desperate. I think I was born in the wrong era. Bjorn came to the conclusion as he caught a glimpse of today's tabloid. There was a picture of him, blown up on the front. It was a pretty good picture today. I should have been born in an age of moderate savagery when it wouldn't have been frowned upon to cut the throats of annoying bastards. He smiled. It was a stark contrast to the anger in his voice. I must admit, their writing skills are improving. I can't wait for the next episode, Bjorn said. Anger, astonishment, and bewilderment passed over Leonid's face as he caught sight of the newspaper too. It was a dirty, provocative scandal. I think this kind of cheap tactic to gain readership should be sanctioned in some way, Leonid said, lining up his shot. The following morning, as Bjorn stood under a steady stream of hot water, He remembered the promise he had made thanks to the news his father had suddenly dropped on him. Determined to put an end to the scandal and erase her presence from his life, Bjorn hurried to the townhouse as soon as he was dressed. When he got there, he found that Erna had already left. She did have a letter waiting for him, should he happen to stop by. It was a very formal thing and said nothing much beyond how grateful she was, but she did not need to borrow money. The attitude in the letter was kind of intrusive, to say the least, but Bjorn decided to let it go. He had no reason to deliver any money personally, no reason to seek out the woman. He actually felt relieved that Erna Hardy was gone. At least the headaches would finally blow away. "I have decided to let you marry Erna Hardy." His father's words rang through his subconscious. Absurd as they were, left him reeling, and he leaned against the wall. She was gone now, far from the tumult of the city and back to her country bumpkin life. It won't be long and her life will be returned to normal. "Your Highness, it's Miss Hardy." Bjorn was thankful to see Mrs. Fitz, but the expression she wore was one of concern. "What is it? Tell me, Mrs. Fitz," Bjorn said coolly. He grew anxious at the mention of the woman. "Miss Hardy is at the Royal Schuber Hospital." "Hospital?" Bjorn snapped. "Yes, she is fine. It was the Baroness Baden. She collapsed at the police station and was taken in. Miss Hardy is there now, looking after the Baroness." Something of relief tugged at Bjorn's heart. Relief that Erna was not hurt. Relief that Erna was still in the city. "You're corrupted, you've fallen." That was all the Baroness could say to her granddaughter when she saw the pale-skinned child sat in the chair next to her bed. Her bony hand trembled as she massaged the side of her head. "Please, Grandma, don't excite yourself," Erna said. She got up and checked on the Baroness, showing her true kind and caring nature. "Do you want to know why I'm here in the first place?" She gave Erna a stern, disapproving look. It was a look that told Erna she no longer believed in the young girl, but no matter what, Erna was going to stand guard at her bedside. "It's common in the city, Grandma. People like gossip and spread rumors. It's the trend," Erna said.
Trend?
"Trend. Oh my God, Erna. This city has corrupted you," shouted the Baroness. Erna had tried to explain several times to the Baroness that the rumors were all lies and terrible lies that not even a child would fall for. The affair with the Grand Duke was a misunderstanding that people ran with and took too far. It didn't help that she kept running into the Grand Duke, and he would behave in the most ungentlemanly manner. The Baroness simply lamented that she should not have sent her child here. Staying at a man's house, hanging around unwholesome people, gossip trends, and now a poisonous prince. The city was a wicked place that had corrupted Erna. "I need to rest," the Baroness whispered in a weary voice and shook her head. It had been a miracle that Erna had turned up like this when she had thought to be missing for days. The Baroness had thought the worst, especially after hearing the rumors and gossip, then reading the newspaper. It was enough to put an elderly woman in an early grave, and it nearly did. But still, Erna showed up as she did, and she was well. "Yes, Grandma," Erna said. "Rest now. I will wake you up at mealtime." Erna got up and left the hospital room, only for Mrs. Grieve to take her place. Erna went down the hall to the window that overlooked the courtyard at the front of the hospital. She had been holding back. She saw her reflection in the window pane and did not recognize the young girl staring back. Lousy eyes, as if she hadn't slept for days and smothered in makeup to hide all the bruises and scars. Erna leaned against the window frame. She was tired. Her whole body was tired. She pressed the heels of her palms into her burning, wet eyes and tried to push away the sadness that dwelt there. The doctor told her that her grandmother needed plenty of bed rest and stability. Erna didn't know how she was going to tell her grandmother. Erna was still quite immature when it came to handling such serious matters. She decided not to tell her just yet, allow her to continue regarding her as if she were her naive granddaughter. Erna, Erna, Erna. All through the summer, it seemed to be the only name anyone ever mentioned. Here, there, and everywhere, all people talked about was Erna. Within the modest ballrooms and lowliest cigar lounges, it was madness. The name was like tinnitus in Bjorn's ears. He closed his eyes as he tried to erase the annoyance from his mind. The cardboard was nearing its end, cooling down, which made sense as dawn was drawing close. Bjorn rested his chin on his fist and stared at the thin slither of light peeking in through the curtains at the far end of the room. Erna. It also cleared the woman's name in his mind too. He got word that she had rushed to the hospital to be by her sick grandmother's side. He also heard rumor that it was Pavel that was paying for the hospital fees. Those two were definitely playing around in the night. Bjorn gave a chuckle as he considered what a woman had told him. "We're longtime family friends," she had said. "Not likely. There's not a fool in the world that would spend that amount of money on family friends." Family, friends, lovers, whatever they were, Bjorn tried not to care anymore. He was going to give that woman the money she needed and be done with this game. He would have done so sooner if it wasn't for her father's orders and absurd scandal. It came round to Bjorn's go, and with an impatient huff, he played the card to end the game. The other players groaned at the expected defeat and resigned themselves to the loss. Bjorn did not revel in the victory. He sat back in his chair, falling deeply into its warm comfort, and closed his eyes. The bustle of the losers leaving the room lasted but a moment, and there were not many others in the game's room this early in the morning. "Hey Bjorn," Peter said, once everyone left. "So, Miss Hardy, she's not a bad girl." "So what?" Bjorn snapped. Peter was startled when Bjorn opened his eyes with a frown and looked at him with dark intent. Peter paused, not wanting to risk offending the prince, but the debt he owed Erna Hardy was too grand not to be known by pretty much everyone. A staunch supporter of Bjorn and Gladys, Peter's mother, grandmother, sister, and even Peter's little niece engaged in circulating cruel rumors about Erna Hardy and her family. Almost overnight, people rose up to fight this new, rising evil named Erna Hardy. The lads were the same way. Those who lacked the guts to confront Bjorn instead vented their repressed animosity on that poor woman. Peter was delighted to learn that Bjorn didn't detest or speak poorly of her. He felt a great sense of relief. Otherwise, he would be the one in a very tough place being on Erna's side. "Well," Peter continued, finding his courage, "what if you don't do this?" was all I was going to say. "At this rate, you're going to be forced into a situation you can't revive from. Me and the other boys feel sorry for you." Peter tried to gloss over the awkward conversation with a friendly smile. Bjorn looked up at the ceiling, not saying a word or even acknowledging what Peter had said. He was growing tired of all the comments and questions people were pouring on him when it came to Erna Hardy. "Go easy, be calm," he would always tell himself, but Peter was different. Everyone seemed to have the same aspirations as Louise when it came to Erna Hardy, which boiled down to stop defending that woman and get the happy ending we all want. It was the spin everyone put on their excuses for meddling in his affairs. The false show of care and affection toward the prince, when really all they wanted to do was grab a juicy nugget of gossip to share at the next gathering and increase their status. Bjorn was getting bored of it. Bjorn looked down at the card table and his share of the chips he had won. The cards that sat face up showed queens, kings, and knights. They resolved to look like Gladys, Louise, and Erna. He blinked and they disappeared. Even if Erna were to disappear, he would still be left with this situation, but the drama would be aimed at another woman, even if he shared but a brief glance at another woman. The only way out, he could see, was to either marry or die. Was his father's heart this cold and calculated when he ordered him to marry Erna Hardy? Marriage without love, divorced without love. It was all politics, and love had no room in politics. Bjorn did not think quite like that. He believed in something simpler, a clear sense of self and numbers. Like it not, it was either good or it was bad. He did not want to deceive himself into wrapping up life in a neat little convenient lie. Not for Gladys, or for any woman, and Erna Hardy was no exception. So, just as he had married without love and divorced without love before, if the benefits are good and outweigh the negative, then there would be no reason why he shouldn't marry Erna. So, what about Erna Hardy? She was beautiful. That was hardly up for debate, and he did enjoy her company. She was like an old, ragged book, full of deficits that had no hope of yielding any benefits. If the position of the Grand Duchess was filled, at least he wouldn't have to hear about Gladys anymore. And the significance of the role was enough to depress Walter Hardy. Bjorn shook his head as he realized he ran in circles and came back to square one. Sighing, grabbed a chip. The card table was a fitting place to resolve things of this turmoil, given that it was where it began. His tolerance was becoming thin under the mounting pressure of this bizarre circumstance. Front and back, head or tail, he weighed all of the possible outcomes before launching the chip into the air. It wasn't long before he got the chip back into his hand. Bjorn slowly spread his fingers apart and saw a picture appear. Head. "What are you doing, Your Highness?" Peter asked, breaking the serene quiet of the game's room. Bjorn realized Peter had not stopped looking at him the entire time he was in thought. "Organize and clean up," Bjorn said. He stood up, grabbed his jacket. "Anything I can help with," Peter said. He felt spurred on by the prince's newfound vigor. "Yeah, gather my chips, would you? I need to head into the city." No matter where Erna went, she could not escape the whispers of gossip. They followed behind her like the wake of a ship. Even here, at the hospital, Erna heard people chatting amongst themselves. First, it was the nurses in their little gaggles at the end of the corridor. Then it felt like people were standing around outside the door, peering in like school children. "Is she really the one?" women said behind their hands, giving her sidelong glances. "I know, is the prince blind?" nurses said, pretending to be talking to their clipboards. People could not believe that she was Erna Hardy, the one who beat the fair Princess Gladys for the prince's heart. They would comment on how shabby she looked, with her plain cotton dresses and tacky makeup. "Isn't she a noble lady, from a noble family? Why does she look like that? That can't be Erna Hardy." Worse still was that Baroness Baden heard these rumors from the doctors and nurses that tended her. Whenever they would come to check on her or her medications, they would talk over her thinking she was asleep. "It's all my fault," she said softly. "I shouldn't have let you go. I ruined your future to protect the house, and now I will have to go and face your grandfather and Annette." As the Baroness blamed herself, tears filled up her tired blue eyes, and just as she was recovering from one ailment, another threatens to take hold of the old woman. Erna could see it already, making the Baroness seem ever more tired. Her wrinkles deepened before Erna's eyes. "Don't say that, Grandma. The prince and I have nothing to do with one another," Erna said. She wished she could say something to convince the Baroness that none of this was her fault, to put her mind at ease. Most were already convinced Erna was a fallen lady, but at least this one small point she can try and clear for her grandmother. "You're really going to tell me that all this buzz is over nothing?" the Baroness said. "Grandma, please, you know full well that people will make up whatever stories they wish, from things they know nothing about," Erna said. "Even so, how can you marry him and tarnish your reputation like this?" We're not getting married, so everything will be fine and people will see that. Erna gave a cheerful smile. Just hang in there. You'll be out of the hospital tomorrow, and then we can move back to Buford. We can live happily there together. Everything here will just become a bad memory. Erna, my little Erna, I can't be by your side forever. I will be with your grandfather soon. The tears in her eyes deepened. Don't say that, Erna said and took up the old woman's hand. Erna, please, it's the sad reality of getting old. You should hold yourself back for my sake. You need to go out there and start your own family. The kind of family that will love and protect you. Not like your father. Grandma. What do you expect me to do when you threaten to ruin your marriage because of me? If I could, I would throw everything that threatens to make you sad into the fires of hell. The Baroness turned away from Erna and shouted at the door, including all these foul, ill-tempered and mean-mouthed rumor mongers. The prince passed at a fast pace along the halls. Doctors and nurses lining the halls, talking over patient files and charts, immediately stopped what they were doing and stood aside for the prince. Bjorn barged his way into the room after knocking on it, not waiting for a response. He paused as he noticed something and delicately took the small red rose from a vase that was sat on the corner. In terms of roses, a darker shade of red conveys more negative meaning. Prince, Erna said. She involuntarily stepped away and blinked rapidly, as if doing so would blink away the scene in front of her. He should not be here and had no reason to be here, so why was he here? The Baroness realized who had come into the room and made to sit up properly. Bjorn did his best to dissuade her from moving and bowed. Baroness, please don't exert yourself on my account. I am late in coming to see you, so I must apologize. I am sorry. Bjorn said. His voice was a soft note that did not dare disturb the quiet serene of the hospital room. Mrs. Grieve, who was sat in the corner near the door, finally let out a breath. Erna closed the rest of the distance between her and Bjorn, more to check he was really there. Why was he here? Was he really only here to see the Baroness? The timing was very convenient if that was the case. A lump of sadness rose up to her throat. She hoped he had not come to trample her heart in front of her grandmother. I am also sorry to you, Miss Hardy, Bjorn said. He looked down at Erna and she could see regret in his eyes. Was it genuine? The apology was unexpected. Go, she wanted to say to him, but she swallowed the thought. I'm sorry, he said again, reading the concern on Erna's face. Really? Yes, it's late. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Bjorn gave the most charming smile he could. Erna didn't understand. She looked up at the prince and saw in his smile, but his eyes were calm. They were deep and calm as they considered her. She shrunk back and sagged her shoulders as she tried to understand the prince. It was then that the prince brought his hand out in front of her and revealed he had been holding a rose. He held it out to her. Bjorn tried a softer smile when he noticed Erna was frowning at the rose, as if in doubt. He came down onto one knee and looked the woman directly in the eyes. They were sad, concerned, and definitely cautious. Miss Hardy. Bjorn's voice was distant to Erna as her mind raced. Erna Hardy, will you marry me? Bjorn held out the flower to Erna. Erna closed her eyes and squeezed them tightly, as if trying to erase the bizarre reality unfolding before her. When she opened them again, Bjorn was still there in front of her, kneeling on one knee. Is he really proposing me, the prince? The fact that this was right in front of her did not make the play of it any more real. Her perception of reality seemed to slip away and the room span. She found herself looking over at her grandmother, who seemed moved to emotion. The room span again as she looked back at the prince. How can you do this? Erna thought. You don't love me, a woman of nothing. Erna could feel the mood in her mind settle on resentment. She resented Bjorn for coming unbidden to the hospital. She resented that smile he wore as he looked up at her, waiting for an answer. Erna wanted to get away from this, to run as far as she could and forget about the mess unfolding before her. She reached out with a trembling hand. She would push the rose away and deny him, but as her fingertips touched the delicate petals, she hesitated. "I'm sorry," he had said. The apology was so brazen, but she was still glad for it. She doubted he really meant it, but she was still grateful that he came, late as it was. At the moment, when she wanted to hate him the most, she found herself clutching the rose of marriage proposal. The room span again. Erna fainted. Bjorn was quick to catch her, and Baroness Baden immediately called out for a doctor. The doctor came through the door in the very same second. There were several doctors and nurses grouped up in the hallway. Within a heartbeat, the rumor that Prince Bjorn had proposed to the Lady Erna Hardy had spread across the city. Over-dramatized stories of impulsive acts of devotion and love and a fainting happy lady filled up the many cigar lounges, gin bars, smoke rooms, and libraries. Luncheon's love story abruptly ended, with a rather tragic end with the villain winning. "Please forgive your father, Erna. Things were bad. At the time, I was cornered," Brenda said. She looked at Erna with a flat, soft expression, which only served to make Erna more nervous. "I understand that it's upsetting for you, but you must understand. Your tea is cold," Erna said, cutting Brenda off. The two women sat in silence as a maid came forward and cleared away the tea. She then poured 2 fresh cups and retreated to her post. "I'm sorry, that is rude. Please continue," Erna said. She looked up from staring at the steaming cups and faced Brenda Hardy once more. Erna was just trying to be polite, but it was clear that she didn't want to hear any more. Brenda bit her tongue though. She did not dare proceed with the interrupted conversation. Erna was to be marred to the prince. She will be the Princess Schubert, and she would not be able to treat Erna how she used to. Erna was to be the city's most top lady. Brenda still saw her as the naughty little girl that ran away from home after being punished. Here she is now, returning home as a princess. When Brenda first heard the rumors of the marriage, she couldn't help but laugh. There was no way Erna would allow herself to get involved with the poisonous mushroom prince. Not even after he had ruined her marriage business, threw her life into a fire pit, and with bankruptcy just around the corner. Then there was the king. Brenda felt sure he wouldn't allow such a thing to take place, but it was quite the opposite. The king set the ceremony for the end of fall, breaking with all tradition, but no one argued. This marriage was ridiculous, but it proceeded anyway. Once the proposal was common news, Erna and the Baroness Baden were moved to his townhouse, and the Baroness began preparations. The Viscount couple, Erna's parents, were excluded from the preparations completely. A rivalry with the official royal family grew, and there was no way to avoid the resentment and disrespect that followed. It was endured because the Hardy family could avoid bankruptcy with this endeavor, and in a week's time, the Hardy family will become the in-laws to the royal family. "You must understand," Brenda continued. "You should make up with your father before the wedding. The pair of you have to walk this road together, and you don't want to make it more awkward than it needs to be. You should have dinner together," Brenda said. "I don't think I can give a definite answer, ma'am," Erna said. "I will have to check my schedule." She was able to keep her voice firm and calm. Brenda looked at Erna with disappointment, but could do nothing except for now. She was a stubborn old coot and would not conceive the point too readily. Even when Erna saw the Viscountess off, later that evening, she reminded Erna to make the time. Erna felt cold under the woman's hard gaze. It reminded her of the scornful eyes that constantly looked down at her through the buzz of public rumor. "I know it's disrespectful to say, But the Viscountess has no shame, said Lisa. How can she suggest forgiveness after what they did to you?
Lisa.
Erna said. She felt embarrassed. I don't think I would understand you, but I'll still love you all the same, Lisa said with bright enthusiasm. Erna looked at Lisa and felt warmed by her shy smile. The day they met, Lisa declared she would follow and love Erna for the rest of her life. It tickled Erna's heart. Now that she was to be Grand Duchess, Lisa thought Erna would forget all about her, being an insignificant maid and all, but Erna came straight away to pick Lisa up. Troublemaker as she was, Erna liked having her around. She was a golden ray of sunshine on a stormy day. You've suffered a lot because of me, Erna said, touching Lisa's arm. I'm sorry for all the trouble. Even though she knew it would be indecent, Lisa let herself be taken into Erna's arms, and she could feel the tears welling up. Erna said nothing and just comforted the maid. I'll follow you, love you, and protect you for the rest of my life. Lisa followed after Erna with rekindled determination. From a neglected hillbilly to a lady's personal maid and soon, handmaiden to the Grand Duchess, Lisa had quite the responsibility ahead of her. Oh, miss, the prince is not coming to see you. Lisa's attitude became firm as she recalled Prince Bjorn. He was a strong enemy of the Hardy family, the very same prince who rode in on a white horse to save Lady Hardy. There was a lot of talk about forgetting the past and moving on recently, but the more Lisa thought of it, the more it looked like a poisonous mushroom. They were turning the whole country upside down with their marriage. They very much seemed like a couple in love, but Lisa could see the shyness that surrounded their meetings. Lisa couldn't understand the prince's attitude toward Erna. He never sent flowers or letters. It was not normal. They were not normal lovers. Something is wrong, and after much internal debate, Lisa came to the conclusion that something is very, very wrong. Oh, I'll visit him tomorrow. We're going to be having luncheon at the palace, Erna replied. She smiled casually, as if not meeting your fiancé for 2 whole weeks was pretty normal. I will pick out a very nice dress, one that will make the prince fall in love with you, Lisa promised. The poisonous mushroom prince will fall in love, Lisa decided. Erna was beautiful, but after her work, Lisa will make sure Erna is irresistible. You terrible thing, Leonard declared. When he went to touch his aching head, it was a reminder of a bitter past, but the lads were so determined to cut the horns of Bjorn that they had made a new one and presented it to him last night at the first bachelor party. Even though it was the second trophy, it still held a deep meaning and held will be charged to Schubert Palace anyway. They laughed. Each time one of them got married, a trophy would be made, with their name written on it, and the idea was to be the man who got away with it at the end of a very heavy drinking session. It was Bergman who lost the last trophy to Bjorn. Bjorn had almost lost his trophy to Leonard, but the drunk fool fell and the alcohol did the rest, allowing Bjorn to make a clean getaway. It had taken 2 nights, but a victor was clear and Bjorn got to add another trophy to his rather large collection. He had not intended to stay that long. With so many trophies, "Miss Hardy is waiting," came a voice. He was already back at his mansion? He must have drifted off into a drunken stupor. "Erna, why?" Bjorn said to the phantom voice. "Oh my God, my prince. How are you in such a state at this hour?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Fitz. She approached him when he got out of the carriage and cried out when she noticed his drunken state. Bjorn staggered with a half-hearted smile on his face, and Mrs. Fitz could do nothing but sigh. "Where is Erna?" Bjorn said. "Where she said she would be. Did you forget that you had a luncheon with your fiancé, my prince?" "But it's only morning. The sun hasn't even come up yet," Bjorn said and looked up into the sky, where the sun lazily drifted over his head. Think he would not show, and she felt the depression hit her like the wind. But now that he was here, striding across the room to her, she felt hope rekindle inside her.